Welcome, everyone. I'm really happy to see so many people here face to face. I know lots of people right now are working and even more on vacations, and some people have even started their classwork in their schools. But I'm so happy to have you here. We are also going to record this webinar for those of you who are busy this morning. But most importantly, I'd like to introduce you today to Dr. Joseph Kerski. He is a colleague and also, I would like to say, a mentor of mine when it comes to GIS. I took my very first class from Joseph when I started teaching GIS at the University of Nebraska. And so we kind of go way back. Since that time, I have sort of stayed in quasi-contact, and he does have a great website and some blogs that make geography come alive. So I put that in the post. But today, I'm very, very happy to have him come and give a presentation. He's presented to my college classes before, so I know we're in for an excellent tutorial. And just a little bit about him. He is an education manager at Esri. Is that still correct, Joseph?
Yes.
Yes, which makes him extremely important. He is, if you don't know anything about Esri, Esri is the company that created the preeminent GIS software, ArcGIS. They are also an incredible company that has really distinguished itself in supporting education about geography and spatial learning at many, many different levels. So I'm very, very honored to be able to introduce Dr. Kerski today. And I also want to let you know that he is willing to entertain your questions while he's doing his presentation. So if you are online right now, feel free to let us, unmute yourself and let us know that you would like to pose a question. So without further ado, I am introducing my fellow Coloradan, Dr. Kerski.
Thanks, Dr. Lowe. Greetings, folks. Joseph Kerski here at your service. We are going to have a grand time today. This set of slides that I'm showing right now, this is sort of touching on what Dr. Lowe was indicating, where I spend most of my time working with educators, students, deans, provosts, and others in education to foster spatial and critical thinking. So what does that mean? We'll talk about that in a minute. But just to let you know, just to reinforce what the folks on the call are saying, that is, here's how to get a hold of me. I'm happy to be in your professional network. If you think that I can add any value to your connections, I would be happy to do that. So feel free to connect with me on various means. I do have many resources because I'm, like you folks, I'm very passionate about the planet and its people and empowering people to use tools like geospatial technology to make wiser and smarter decisions about their community, about their region, about their country, about their world. So feel free to tap in any of these resources, books, blogs, podcasts, videos, lessons, etc. Let me just say this too, that I just salute all of you that are involved with working with fine people like Rusty and Cassie and others, because they are immersed in this whole GIS, Geographic Information Systems, going through this massive change paradigm, right? Many things in our world are up in the cloud, and it's great to have your music in the cloud, and it's great to have your documents, your spreadsheets, and Google Drive and Dropbox and so on. But I just submit to you all that it's even more important that we have geospatial technology and spatial data in the cloud because of something that I'm going to mention here in a moment. So we've got some technical changes, software as a service, that's what we're going to be into today, data as services rather than having to download every single piece of information to make decisions with it. That's huge in geospatial technology. And also on the instructional side, those of you that are teaching or will teach or something like that in the future, it's good to know that using these is aligned with what we consider to be not just we on the call, but educational researchers out there on the whole planet thinking that this is good educational practice to have students actually problem solving and doing inquiry and investigating and asking questions and gathering data and making decisions. And also on the societal part of things, you're part of these what I consider to be the 5 most important forces that are acting to bring this to a key opportune moment in the world of geospatial technology. So those of you that are just getting into this right now, I salute you. And those of you that are sort of, well, I'm not quite sure how much of a major part of my career is going to be immersed in this, I just want to encourage you that this is a great time to actually step into this, because we've got geo-awareness. We've got more and more people aware of issues, problems in our 21st century world: water, energy, population change, natural hazards, etc., biodiversity loss, climate. I mean, you name it. They all have a spatial component, right? And hence they can all be understood with geospatial technologies and methods. So the awareness is at an all-time high. There's also an enablement where even the general public is using some sort of geospatial technology, even if it's just to look at a piece of property as a satellite image, or finding the nearest coffee shop or the library or something like that, where they're using some of these tools that we'll be immersed in today. And then the geotechnologies themselves having evolved into this cloud-enabled environment, again, is very helpful, because guess what? All those problems and issues that I mentioned earlier, energy, water, population, etc., they're not confined to political boundaries, right? They transcend regions, they transcend countries. And so it's really important that we have these tools that allow a lot of different people to work on them. And they also transcend disciplinary boundaries. So if you're interested in health or business or planning or natural resource management or any other field nowadays, you're going to be touched by and influenced by, and you're going to be able to use these geospatial technologies and methods and spatial data sets in your work, even if GIS manager is not part of your job title. You're going to be able to use these effectively. And then also, no stranger to you all involved in the GLOW program, you were citizen science before citizen science was even a phrase, a term. So it's exciting to work with good folks like you that really get the whole idea, really understand the whole idea of collecting data, being critical of it, analyzing it, and then looking at it in the context of many different tools, GIS being one of them. And then finally, storytelling with maps. Maps have been used for thousands of years to tell effective stories. And today we're going to talk about a little bit about how you might be able to use these storytelling with geospatial technology tools to be able to tell your story, not just in the programs that you're working on right now, but in the future, in your own workplace. Pretty exciting stuff. So that all being said, I'm a big fan of Cassie and Rusty and these other folks on the call. This is Cassie and I a couple of weeks ago at the South Dakota GIS conference, geeking out and hanging out together. And we were there because of the reason why you're here on this call, and those of you that are watching the recording later on, that we're lifelong learners. We've been immersed in this for a while, but we know that we've got to keep learning new methods, new tools, new approaches. So I salute you all for being here today. And again, I'm a big fan of all of you. So for me, what it comes down to is what's where. By the way, here's a little geographic quiz for you. Where is this? Where did I take this picture? Let's take a look at the chat. Any guesses? It doesn't look like any USA road signs, does it? But yet the language is something that you recognize. All right, in the interest of moving on, you've got something in your mind, right? I'll come back to it. So what's where? Why is it there? And then finally, and most importantly, why should we care, right? Why should we care? To me, this is what it comes down to. Why are we using geotechnologies in education and research, instruction, and beyond? It is because of this. Geotechnologies are essential for understanding the patterns, relationships, trends in our world. And so think about this: what's where, why is it there, and why should we care triplicate as you go forward. Now, let me also what do you mean, Joseph? What do you mean patterns, relationships, and trends? Well, let me just give a couple of examples. What's the relationship between land use in a place and land cover in a place? Land use versus land cover. What about temperatures? What's the relationship between even mean annual temperature or extreme temperatures and the relationship of that to coastlines? What about the relationship of temperatures to altitude? So how does altitude or elevation affect temperature, mean annual temperature, or highs and lows? And then finally, how does latitude affect temperatures, northern versus southern hemisphere, for example? And then lastly, let's think about natural hazards. Pick earthquakes. What's the relationship of earthquakes to major cities, and why should we care about that? What's the relationship of earthquakes to fault lines or plate boundaries? Or vulnerable populations? How do we build resilient cities? All those things are spatial questions. And all of these problems and issues that we talked about earlier, energy, water, et cetera, on our planet, are spatial in nature, so they can be understood better with geotechnologies. One of which is the things that you folks are immersed in right now, is gathering data in the GLOBE program, analyzing it, and then making sense of it. So I've been asked to continue this whole presentation with, okay, let's do some demonstrations about how do you get data from the GLOBE site, and then how do you bring it in, and then how do you map it and analyze it. First of all, I'm hoping I, through those comments, laid some groundwork with why should we be doing this? Now, I'm a firm believer in, there's lots of good technological tools out there, right, folks? There's R, there's GIS, there's remote sensing software, et cetera. So why would I use them? Only use them if it adds value to your research project. Don't just use them because they're there. Now, sure, there's something to be said for experimenting with different things just because they look interesting. But you want to use the most appropriate tool for the job. And I just submit to you all that since you're looking at things that are spatial in nature, they occur somewhere, and they are affected by geography, basically, that geospatial technology is a key tool to use for doing that. In fact, the U.S. Department of Labor back about 12 years ago said, hey, there are 3 hot fields or growing fields for the 21st century: nanotechnologies, biotechnologies, and geotechnologies. Geotechnologies. That's what we're immersed in today, is the geotechnologies. So it makes sense that we want to use geotechnologies to analyze our world. Now, for example, the GLOBE data, you've got no shortage of data that you can actually use in a variety of ways, and we'll just explore a few of those ways today. So in the globe.gov site, right, there's this advanced data access tool. If you go to the advanced data access tool, you can do, and I won't walk you through all of these because I think you might be familiar with these, but you can filter. So for example, if I filtered on mosquito habitat and maybe states and maybe certain regions and certain latitude, longitude boundaries, certain date ranges, I can filter down and get exactly what I want to be able to analyze. So that's exactly what we did for this webinar today. We downloaded the data from the globe.gov site. Then we do the following. Let's say we want to go to map that, and I think one of the best ways to do that easily and quickly is with something called ArcGIS Online. So if we go to ArcGIS Online, it is a web-based mapping tool. And if I go to just simply www.arcgis.com, I'm going to get this. And if I say, oh, I want to map that phenomenon, that issue, so how do I do that? I've got a blank map of the world. It's a seamless map. I've got some different base maps that I can change it to, Imagery, et cetera, right? I can scroll all the way and I can keep going around the planet. Okay, but what if I want to modify that? So notice in the upper right-hand corner, we've got Modify Map. And then I can add data. And if I add layer from file, this is the file that I downloaded from the globe.gov site. And it is just a zip file. It's a CSV. And what we've got in here is we've got some data from the GLOBE program inside the inside there. So we're going to upload that, and what happens when you upload that file is it's going to be a map, okay? It's going to look like this. So let me open the data that I've just added. I'm going to go to ArcGIS Online, and I'm going to, well, let's start right here. Let's say import layer, and now I'm going to choose my file. Let's choose a file now. So I'm going to go with, how about this CSV file that I've downloaded? So I'm going to search for some CSVs. Lots of good stuff here. Here's some GLOBE mosquito data that I got from Cassie, and she just downloaded it from globe.gov, as you saw me demonstrate earlier. Now, there's one thing about this, and I just want to go ahead and open that file. I want to show you a couple of things in that file, not to get too much into the weeds here in this workshop, but just so you know that it is not a matter of finding any file out there and being able to use it. Now, sometimes that's the case. Sometimes that's not the case. Many times when you get spatial data, it's going to require you to manipulate it a bit. So in this particular case, notice that there is some interesting stuff in here. For example, if you're looking at something like a number, right? You want to be able to make sure that that field, right, format cells, is classified or formatted as a number, because oftentimes numbers are actually formatted as text. They look like numbers, but they're actually text. And so when you bring it into your mapping package, you're not going to be able to do things like give me all of the Mosquito sites where there's more than 10 eggs. You know what I mean? More or less of something. You're not going to be able to manipulate it or analyze it as numbers. So that's one thing that you're going to have to do to most of the tables that you get from the globe.gov site. The other thing that you're going to be encountered with is sometimes tables have more than one header row. And so what I've done in this one is I've actually deleted the number 2 header row. There were 2 rows of, you know what I mean by headers? They're the things that describe what's to follow in the data set. So in this case, it's basically the field names. But in this case, the globe.gov table of data, one record for every site that was monitored, contained 2 header rows. So not a big deal. You just have to do a little bit of manipulation on the data sets oftentimes. So I'm going to go ahead and upload that, and I'm going to import that. And now I've got a base map that is still the satellite image base map, and I'm going to change that back to topographic right here. And the smart mapping kicks in with ArcGIS Online. It looks at the data that you've got, and it guesses as to what you want to map. Well, maybe I'm not interested in elevation, so I can go ahead and show just location only at this point. So if I show just location only, as you can see, I've just got one location for every single one of my observations. All right, so far so good. So it took the latitude and longitude values right from that table, and it mapped them, because every single location in here has a latitude longitude value. So if I go over here to the measure tool and I click on some location, notice I've got a latitude longitude. Ooh, why is the longitude negative? Western hemisphere, right? If I pan down to the southern hemisphere, they're going to be negative latitudes. So, okay, so it takes data that's location-based and allows you to map it, okay? And again, don't just map it because maps are cool. Maps are cool. What's not to love? But map it because it's adding value to your understanding of what is happening with that particular phenomenon that you're studying, okay? So that all being said, you can take data that's latitude, longitude. You can get data that's a street address. You can have data that's a city, country combinations. Whatever is the location that you're trying to study, you can map that, as long as it, again, is in some sort of tabular format where you can bring it in. I mean, you can bring in data that's not tables as well, but that's a subject for another webinar. How do you bring in other kinds of spatial data? Lots of ways to do that nowadays. Okay, but the point is here, pretty easy, right? If I hadn't been talking so much, it would have taken you about 30 seconds to bring in that CSV file into this platform called ArcGIS Online. It's online, it's living online. I'm just using a web browser, as you can see, but I've got this data map now. So, okay, let's go ahead and do a couple of other things. Let's go ahead and show the table. So look, we've still got the table, but now it's connected to the map. And in this case, I've got 2,486 observations, which are 2,486 separate points on this map, right? And it's got the latitude and longitude, as you can see, just like we looked at in Excel. You've got some different variables that now you can map and study. And just like a regular table, you can say, you know what, I want to sort this stuff. So now I'm going to sort this on elevation, and I can see that this particular observation, and I'm going to scoot these zoom tools around. Hopefully you're not seeing those zoom tools in the recording. But if I sort on elevation, now I'm going to go to, I'm going to center on selection. Where is that? Let's get rid of this one right here. Oh, it looks like it's in Peru. Let's go ahead and zoom to that location. This one that's highlighted in cyan, it's in Quito, or just southwest of Quito. Yeah, so it's high in elevation. Interesting. So you see what I mean? I've gone to that location now. I can look where it is on the map just by using a couple of tools in this table. Excellent. So now let's go ahead and sort ascending, and now I've got an elevation of a negative number. And now this touches on our being critical of data. That's probably an error, right? If you got negative 3,991 meters, unless someone was in a submersible, these negative numbers are highly suspect, correct? Let's look at the lowest of the positive numbers here. I've got a lot of negatives in here, but let's go look at this one. This one's at sea level. Where is that exactly? I don't know. But you see what I mean? I'm looking at the data, I'm investigating, I'm asking questions, and that sort of thing. Okay, so let's go back to this content, and now I'm going to change the style that I'm mapping. So instead of elevation, I'm going to map, how about the water source? Okay, the water source. Interesting. So now I've got these things mapped as a water source. Let's go ahead and say done there. And let's pop up that legend. Okay, so now I've got these things mapped as the different kinds of sources for the mosquito gathering, right? So now, for me, the base map is kind of interfering with my data analysis. So I'm going to get rid of the table. I'm going to scroll up here, and I'm going to look at the water source. Is there any sort of pattern that I might see in the water sources? Interesting. You see where I'm going with this, right, folks? Yeah, fascinating. Now, here's another thing that we might want to pay attention to. Notice this clustering of the points. The clustering of the points, if you've got a lot of points in a certain location, like I know there's someone here from Oklahoma University. We've got a bunch of points down there. And this clustering kind of helps you understand that there's a lot of points in Oklahoma City. Now, you can adjust the clustering here, and if you disable the clustering, then you actually see the number of points that we have around Oklahoma City. And it looks like, according to the let's say okay here, according to the legend, that looks like, let's go ahead and click on these, right? You get a pop-up, which again, you can configure. Any one of these things that I'm doing, you can actually configure these so that you don't have all of the fields in this pop-up. You can say, oh, well, what I want to do is I want to configure the pop-up, and oh, I don't want all of those fields listed. Let's go ahead and say, a custom attribute display. I can configure that. Or I can say list of field attributes, and I can say, you know what? I want to be able to say, oh, you know what? A custom attribute display. I'm going to add a field. How about just the water source? Let's go ahead and click on that. So that's the URL for the water source. Let's go ahead and how about just genus? Okay, so now I've got that, and if I say okay, now if I click on that point again, you see what I mean? It's only going to be, I've got several points in there. It's only going to be a smaller amount of, maybe that one didn't have a source on it. So again, being critical of the data. Yeah, so I've got a smaller number of attributes there. So maybe none of those actually had a water source. But anyway, the point is you can configure these attributes. Very nice. Another thing that I wanted to show you folks is that you can select certain things in the table. Right now I've got 0 selected, but let's say I want to select something. I want to filter it. So this is getting into a little bit of GIS geekiness. You can't filter when it's just mapped from a table. There are certain things that you can do as a table, but there are other things you can do when this actually is mapped as a feature service. A feature service is a GIS layer, and think about this. It gives you more power. One of the things it gives you over and above mapping a table like we've just done is it lets you filter the data. I want all the mosquito sites that are of the last week, or I want all of the larvae over 10, or you see what I mean? I want all the temperatures that are between 20 and 30 degrees C, or whatever it is. That's the kind of thing that you can do when it's mapped as a feature service. And without getting into too much detail here in this short webinar, we've only got 3 hours together, right, folks? Just kidding. We don't have 3 hours together. But just getting into it just a little bit, let me show you what I did here in this particular ArcGIS Online organizational subscription. Now, how do you get ArcGIS Online? Let's talk about that for just a moment. If you go to developer.arcgis.com, in the developer site, developer.arcgis.com, hey, sign up for free. So that's one way to get an ArcGIS Online organizational subscription. And you may have noticed in the analysis that I was doing with you a moment ago, I haven't signed in. I was doing some fairly powerful things, but I hadn't signed into anything yet. Okay, I can add data, I can look at the table, I can change the symbology, and so on and so forth, configure the pop-ups, but I haven't signed in. Okay, so you might say, well, Joseph, why would I need an account if I can do all this stuff without signing in? Well, because, again, use the most appropriate tools for the job. If you just want to explore some data, there's no need to sign in. But once you want to save things or do some spatial analysis, then you're going to want to sign in. In order to sign in, you actually have to have an account. And one way to get the account is through ArcGIS Online's developer zone, as you've got here in the chat box. So it says sign up for free. Guess what? That account does not expire. It gives you a certain number of credits per month, 30, which gives you a fair amount of capability. I mean, you can't geocode every water well in North America or every Starbucks in Shanghai, but you can do some fairly decent amount of work in there. But you also have, through the GLOBE program, and you need to talk to Cassie and Rusty about this, getting an account through the project that you're working on with them. They can also get you an ArcGIS Online account. And for those of you that are in actually a K-12 school, schools can actually sign up to get a free account in ArcGIS Online as well through www.esri.com/education. And for those of you that are at universities like OU and elsewhere, guess what? Most universities already have an ArcGIS Online account. In fact, they've got a lot of other Esri technology at their university as well. So there's no one way. There's multiple ways of actually getting an account for yourself, and I think developers is one way to do that. But there are certainly other ways, okay? So that all being said, now that I've signed in, I'm going to have a content area. So now I've signed in, as you can see in the upper right-hand corner, I'm signed into my own ArcGIS Online organizational subscription, which you will have if you go to developers or if you go to your university and say, hey, I want one of the sign-ins for the account that we have with ArcGIS Online, and then you'll be basically creating content. What do I mean by content? Maps, tables, layers. So that's what I've got here. I've got a folder called globe.gov. And I've got some things in there that I've been working on this week preparing for this webinar. And a couple of things I'm actually going to show you. I've got a web map that's very similar to what we looked at earlier, with one exception. I'm going to open it in the map viewer, so it's going to look very similar to what we looked at earlier. But this time I've got a couple of additional things in there that I want to explore with you all on. So this is very similar to what we looked at earlier. I've got the table of data mapped. But I also saved it in ArcGIS Online as a feature service. So what does that give me? Well, time doesn't permit us to go into it in too much detail, but know that it gives you additional power. One of the things that it gives you is, as you can see now, I've got a filter button on there. So if I click on the filter button, now I can say, oh, well, now I want larvae count is at least 10. Okay, and now I'm going to apply the filter. And now you can see that instead of, 2,400, now we're down to 582 observations. And so you see where I'm going with this, right? You can use the filter to narrow down the amount of data by any criteria that you've got, provided you've got that criteria in the table of data that you're working with. Very powerful to be able to do that. And so again, it's just taking the data that you had before, but making a feature service out of it. So now I've just changed the symbology to, okay, now I'm looking at eggs. Eggs was yes or no. So here we've got a false and a true. If it's true, it's yes. If it's false, it was no. So now I can see, oh, okay, what's the pattern of where these observations were all around the planet? And it looks like down here, for example, there were a lot of falses. Okay, interesting. So if I go back to content now, again, I've just changed the symbology or the style. And so now here, I'm looking at, oh, what about the number? The number of this is larvae, the number of larvae. Now I'm going to take off the filter, but let's take a look at this. Okay, I've got the number of larvae, and look, I've got this enable clustering on, so let's take that off, and now let's look at the pattern that we see. So this is, again, the number of larvae. I've got a big observation here. Again, it makes me a bit suspicious because it's vastly bigger than any of the others, but let's go ahead and do another powerful thing in a GIS. Let's go ahead and change the style, but let's go under options for size, and now we want to classify the data. Ooh. Classify the data. It lets you look at data in a set of categories, 2, 3, 4, 9, There's no limit to the number of categories, but you want to make sure that you're cognizant of the human mind, right? You get too many categories, it's going to be confusing to your people or to you looking at your map. So let's say I wanted to use 4 classes, and look, I've even got different ways I can classify the data. And remember, maps are powerful tools, so you want to choose carefully, and there's all kinds of guidelines out there on what data classification method is best. Maps can lead, they can mislead also. So you want to be cautious about how you're presenting your data and picking the most appropriate method. Now, quantile gives me the same number of observations for every category or class. So in this case, I've got, what, 2,400 total, and I think I've got the filter on as well. So it's going to give me the same number of observations in all those 4 categories. So here I've got the larvae count, and I can see now that it's a bit easier to understand now maybe than it was before, because I can click on any one of these, and I haven't modified the pop-up box, but you know that I can do that. So you see where I'm going with this, right, folks? You can change the number of categories, classes that you can map. Okay, let's do this. Let's do the following. I want to run an analysis now. This is another advantage of me actually using a signed-in account, okay? So if I do analysis here, I've got some capabilities. Give me the number of things within other things. And for example, the number of Mosquito data sites that are within a certain distance of another thing, a city, a coastline, a mountain range, a river, etc. Okay? I can do other things with analysis. I can make view sheds. What kinds of places on the terrain can I see from a certain site? I can trace downstream, dropping the classic, drop a cup of water on the landscape, and where does that water flow? If it could flow unimpeded from the location that I dropped it to the ocean. Those sorts of things. I can enrich my data with things that are in this Living Atlas of the World or ArcGIS Online platform. Population, land cover, energy resources, etc., that we've chatted about earlier. Looking at patterns, I can create a density surface. I can find areas of significant difference. For those of you that love spatial statistics, this is for you. Wonderful. Buffering, classification, creating hotspot, overlaying one map layer on another. So what I did with that particular analysis tool is, first of all, I created a buffer around, well, first I made map notes. And the map notes that I have, let's zoom to the location of my map note. The map note that I dropped is right here on Minneapolis, Minnesota, okay? So there's my note that I dropped. It's just a push pin in this case. And then I made a buffer using those analysis tools of 250 kilometers around the map note, okay? Always being critical of the data, let's go ahead and change it to kilometers, and let's measure from there to the outer perimeter of that circle. So you can see that it's 250 kilometers. Okay, great. So that worked. What about this? Once I've got that buffer there, then I can figure out, okay, how many observations are within that buffer? And maybe I should change the symbology a bit. Let's just change the transparency, make this a little bit more transparent. You see where I'm going with this, folks? You can modify these maps. Very exciting. Okay, so within this zone, how many observations do I have in there? Well, I can count if it's not very many, but what if you've got thousands of these? You don't want to be counting manually and introducing all sorts of error potential. So what I did here is I just ran a summarize within. So if I summarize within, it tells me, okay, you've got 9 points in there. The sum of the larvae count for those 9 points is 13. The average elevation in meters is 274, and that's what I did. It's a very simple analysis, right? But hopefully you're seeing that, oh, there's a lot of power here. Absolutely. These aren't just a bunch of graphics floating around in cyberspace, folks. This is what you've got at your fingertips is not something we're just making up for today's webinar. This is what modern transportation systems are based on. This is what energy sources are based on. This is what people use for supply chain management, food security, healthcare, all the rest of it. Okay, so this is a powerful tool set at your fingertips, and we've just touched a little bit on this, but in our last remaining precious moments together, I'd like to show you a couple other things. So once you've created a map in ArcGIS Online, then notice you can save it. And when you save it, it's going to go into your own ArcGIS Online account, which is what you were seeing earlier when you looked at my content. So let me go to my content. This is all the stuff that I've saved, right? So I've got a bunch of layers in there, like the buffer layer, the point layer, the original CSV or comma separated value, which came from the spreadsheet from globe.gov, and a bunch of other things that I'll show you here in a moment. Well, I won't show you all of them. Time permitting, we'll show you a few. Okay, so that goes into your content. So you manage that content. It's not on your computer. It's up in the geospatial cloud. It's ArcGIS Online. Very nice. Okay, so let's talk about another thing. If I go back into my web map, let's go ahead and go back in there. This is the one that we were looking at a moment ago, and I wanted to touch on one thing that we kind of breezed by. This page is called the metadata page. Metadata. It describes what's inside your map or your layer. Now, folks, one thing I really want to impart to you all, or all y'all as they say in Texas, ustedes, vous, okay, you all out there, is that because we have this capability of grabbing data and analyzing it, it's really important to understand who created that data. When was it created? How often was it updated? What scale was it created at? So be critical consumers of data. There's a lot of good mapping data out there, but since it's an open platform, there's a lot of data, period. And some of it's good, some of it looks good, but it's not really well documented. Some of it is rigorous, some of it is not rigorous. So you need to be critical consumers of data. Maps have this sort of air of authenticity. We think, oh, a map, that's perfect. It's produced by a national mapping agency. That was true in the past. Didn't never mean those maps were perfect. I used to work at USGS and Census and NOAA and other agencies that produced mapping data. It never meant that those maps were perfect, but yes, it means that you need to be critical of the data, especially nowadays when anybody, including you and me, can create map data. Okay, so yeah, on the coding integration, if you go to the developers page and you go to labs, these labs, by the way, allow you to get started with, hey, what's behind all these maps? It's JavaScript and Python. So some of the labs give you, the left side is a web map like we were looking at earlier, and the right side gives you the actual code that goes behind the map. So if you're interested in the coding aspect of WebGIS, we need people like you out there that understand how to actually develop in web mapping tools. Okay, so yes, good question. I'm going to get rid of a couple of these tabs right now. Okay, so back on our content area. So this is the metadata page that tells you a little bit about the map. And if you're creating map data, which I hope you will in the future, yeah, there's an ArcGIS Bridge as well. Good question. That you will spend a little time in here. You don't need to write your master's thesis in here, folks, or if you're in high school, you don't need to write your whole high school term paper. But you need to pay attention and document where your sources are, at least a little bit, especially if you're going to share those with others, okay, if you're going to share that map with others. Okay, so let's go ahead and open up that map viewer again. And I've done some changes, so it was just warning me, hey, Joseph, you've made some changes to that web map. You want to save those changes or not? So I'm back here under this. You can see the different layers that I've got here inside here. So if I share this with others, other people can use this. I can save, I can share. Who do I want to look at this? Now, I can have everybody in the world being able to see my data or your data, right, if you're the author, or I can just make a group inside my organization. Maybe it's a couple of colleagues that are working on this Mosquito project, and you just want to share this with them. Or you've got another group of researchers. So you can just create a group and share the map with the group. Or you don't have to share it with anyone. It's just your own personal project. Nobody else can see it except you. So that's one thing I wanted to talk about with you. The second thing I wanted to talk about that's really key in this is creating a web app. So there are web mapping applications. This ArcGIS Online platform allows you to seamlessly create these web mapping applications. Again, no coding required. If you know a little code, you can make these even more powerful. But let's just take it from the beginning without any coding required. You can see there are templates that we've got that allows you to do things like, oh, look, swipe and spyglass, where you've got time sequence A on the left side and time sequence B on the right side, and you're looking at, let's say, changes in mosquitoes over the last 5 years in a certain part of, I don't know, Mississippi, Okay, so you can create that kind of a map where you've got this like squeegee thing, this swipe that you can have your users swipe across it. So those are the kinds of mapping applications that I'm talking about here. Now I've built 2 of these that I want to show you with this exact same method. I'm not going to go through these methods of actually building it. I'm going to show you the sort of the final product. Web App Builder, though, this is a way for you to actually construct your own tools that you can say, I want a zoom tool, I want a pan tool, I want a overlay tool. You can actually build these tools using this thing called the Web App Builder and something called Operations Dashboard that I'll get into in a moment. So, okay, that all being said, here is a story map. This is a type of web mapping application. It is just a series story map. So it looks kind of similar to what we had before. We have interactivity. We are able to do pop-ups, okay? But you can see that it is sort of a, in this case, it's a story map, and all these web mapping applications actually are sort of the end product that you give to the people that you want to view your data. If you gave them a link to ArcGIS Online, they'd be able to have those tools that I showed you earlier, the measure tool, the analysis tool, if they were logged in, etc. But if you want to give them sort of a reduced set of functions that only you want them to do, then this is one way to do it. So in this case, let's say I wanted to show people, okay, mosquitoes, great. This is where we've got the data set, and are there eggs? Okay, so this is going to look similar to what we had before, right? It's false, true, or other if that attribute wasn't recorded. And again, we've got functionality. We can pop these things up. And then we tab over here to the larvae count. Okay, so this is, again, very similar to what we had before, but now it's inside of a web mapping application. Yeah, so larvae count. And then sites near Minneapolis-St. Paul. So these are the sites near that buffer zone that I created around my push pin, which was a map node. You see where I'm going with this, folks? Now we've got 4 tabs, and that's all that your end user can do. So it's not the end all be all, but for certain things, these story maps, these web mapping applications might be the final product that you actually give. Now, if you're in a high school, you might use this to present, right? Your research. If you're in a university, ditto, and your instructor can assess your work based on this story map, because again, it's a URL that you can share with your instructor, with other people that you want to have look at your map. So that's one thing you can do with these. The nice thing about this platform, it's all connected. So story maps and ArcGIS Online and actually bringing in the data, right? And the analysis tools, it's all part of the same platform. So it's not just some little tool that Joseph's got on his computer somewhere in Colorado. It's actually tied to the Amazon Web Services and the Microsoft Azure Cloud. So it's a major backbone that's supporting all of this. I mean, there are millions of maps made daily in this ArcGIS Online platform. Let me show you just one more thing, and that is this operations dashboard. Oh, so now we've got, again, the same kind of data, but I built this operations dashboard. As the name implies, it's a dashboard to let you see, as data is populated in the data set that you're using, what's going on. So here's the total number of field sites that we had. You know this number because that's the number we had in our table. Here's the larvae count. Here's a sample of the data that was collected. And then eggs, yes, no, or null, meaning it wasn't filled in. The method gathered. So 71% was in a container, right? 20% was in a still pond, lake, swamp, flowing water, etc. So these little widgets, these graphs, these charts, these tables, these gauges, they're called, along with these maps, can be built with the same technique that I was showing you earlier. You go into share and you say, I want a operations dashboard, and then it says, okay, what do you want to have in there? Do you want a chart? Do you want a graph? So again, no coding required. You're just building these things, and then you can share this just like you can share anything else. So think about, if this map was tied to some sort of real-time data, this number up here would increase or decrease based on the number of observations or whatever you're gathering. Oh, interesting. Yeah, so again, all these tools are tied together, and this is an operations dashboard. And I'm going to type into the chat box here to respond to this. okay, so I've bumped up against my time limitation, but we've covered a lot today. We've covered how to bring in data, how to manipulate the table, how to change the symbology, changing the style. There are expressions that you can build in there that I didn't touch on that allow you to have even more power in there. You can create multiple expressions with a language called Arcade, which is very similar to Python. You can also use Python expressions, SQL expressions. We talked a little bit about filtering and analysis, buffering, overlay, summarize within, creating a story map, and also an operations dashboard. So, okay, let's just talk about the satellite imagery for the moment. Remember remember you've got the capability. We're sticking to Oklahoma, okay, and we're going to go to imagery, and we're going to go zoom into this site right here. So look, I've got it streamed in actually. So here's a site and there's a site. Looks like it's in someone's backyard. Okay, interesting. So, and it looks like it's right across the street from what looks like a school, perhaps. May not be a school, but the point is that look, you've got imagery, and let's say you don't like that imagery. Let's say you search for layers, and you say, oh, I want clarity. There's a certain kind of imagery called world image with clarity. It's a different age than the default imagery, so now I've got a different date on it, and maybe it's obviously taken at a different time of year with the vegetation that we see there. And can I change this blue symbol so I can see it a little bit better? Absolutely. Remember, all this stuff is customizable, and so we've got some decent resolution imagery there. Also, while we're on the topic, let's say I want to add something like World Hydro, because I want to see, I'm going to change the base map to terrain with labels now, and I'm going to, World Hydro. Again, be critical of the data, know where all these layers are coming from, don't just add things sort of haphazardly, but I'm going to change the base map to terrain with labels, and now I'm going to zoom out because maybe I'm interested in I've got the clarity on. That's why I'm not. Okay, so now I've got I've got terrain with labels, and I've got rivers. So now I can see where these rivers are flowing in Oklahoma, right on down to the Arkansas and down to the Mississippi, etc. What are these dashed lines in this layer? The watershed boundaries. So if I zoom into Oklahoma City, I can see the different watersheds. I've got the North Canadian, and then up here I've got the watershed for the probably the Cimarron, isn't it? Yes, the Cimarron. Hey, my geography did not fail me. Cool, I passed the test. Anyway, the point is you've got, oh my gosh, what if we added, how about ecoregions? And then while I'm doing that, you can think of other questions for me. Look, ecoregions level 3 and 4, so fairly detailed. This is a particular US data set. There's other data sets that are global. But if I wanted to add that to the map, I'm going to zoom out a little bit as we can't add that one. Okay, no worries. We've got another level 4 ecoregions. Let's go ahead and, yep, we've got some issue there. So level 4 ecoregions, let's go ahead and add that. And you see where I'm going with this, right, folks? You've got the capability of adding additional data. Maybe there's an issue with the ecoregions at the moment. How about this? With adding that data to ArcGIS Online. And let's say we want to add something else like, okay, how about mean annual temperature? You've also got, look, at CIAT, they've got a data set, and here are the people that actually created the data set. So when you create data, you might want to create your profile that here's where you work, this is the kind of things that you're doing, et cetera, et cetera. So the point is that, gosh, that is amazing that, look, now we've got the mean annual temperature, again, being critical of the data, know where it came from and who created it and so on and so forth, but no shortage of content. Let's pop up that legend here. Okay, so red over 30 mean annual temperature. Fascinating. Wow, very cool. So no shortage of different kinds of imagery. Yeah, and in terms of satellite imagery, you've got, let me just do one of them here, and that is in the Living Atlas, you've got the Sentinel-2 data. This came out last summer, and I'm really quite excited about it because in the Sentinel-2 imagery, you've got the capability of doing the things like, oh gosh, querying for certain dates. So I've got a little lesson, for example, I've got the Sentinel-2 data, and this is asking me to log in because this particular data set is actually one of those capabilities where if you logged in, you have more capability than if you're not logged in. So I have a data set that is the Sentinel-2 data set, and I've queried it based on a certain date, and then I zoom over to Hawaii, and I'm looking at I render it in DRA, geology, dynamic range enhancement. So I'm looking at the shortwave part of the spectrum, and I can see the fissures and the lava flowing out from the fissures at Kilauea. I mean, fascinating to be able to do that, again, with the same tools that you folks were looking at a bit ago, and that is with filtering in this case and then changing the data. So yes, definitely no shortage of satellite imagery out there of various kinds. You know, AVHRR, yeah, drone imagery, UAVs, absolutely. Awesome, folks. Well, I hope that was helpful. Again, lots to take in there, but you know, feel free to watch the recording after this for, you know, soaking in a little bit more. But really, there's tutorials. There are lessons that you can use. There are 1 or 2 hour lessons that you can actually use to get more familiar with ArcGIS Online, for example, and how to bring in data and how to analyze it, how to symbolize it, how to classify it, all of those sorts of things. I've got some things, for example, that I've created recently that might be of use, and that is I have a set of essays that I write on GeoNet, which is our Esri GIS community, and one of the things that might be of use is I've got 3 new GIS-based lessons, Change Over Space and Time, which you Globe folks might like, GIS for Beginners, and Teaching and Learning with the Living Atlas. So those 3 things I think will be great for you to sort of, oh, wow, I didn't realize the Living Atlas, thousands of data layers, change over space and time, what's not to love about that, population, coastal erosion, water quality changes, et cetera, and then GIS for beginners. How do I actually step into this from the starting block? So, excellent. All right, folks. Gosh, well, just to sort of build on, just to wrap things up here, you know, just want to lay this out before you. Our key 3 focal areas here at Esri, our mission is education, sustainability, and science. So that all being said, that's what drives us all forward, why we're so passionate about this. But also, in your own future career pathway, Esri is a great organization for you to think about working for someday. There's lots of good organizations out there, but we are in continual need of good people like you that really want to understand the world and really are using critical thinking, spatial thinking. You're using your own brains, and you're making a positive impact on our planet. So I just salute you, and I wish you all the best. And if there's anything I can do in the future, you know how to get a hold of me. Thanks.
Thank you, Joseph. This has been phenomenal, and we do have time for 1 or 2 questions if anybody would like to unmute and ask a question. I just wanted to ask, you know, one of the things that we're interested in doing is NASA's interested in people using the NASA data, and is it easy to search for NASA data in your atlas? I know I actually really like the Sentinel data.
Yeah, me too.
But is it possible to search for the NASA data easily so that we could check a box there, or is that just...
Yeah, I would start with the Living Atlas, and then once you're in the Living Atlas, there is a browse, livingatlas.arcgis.com, and then under Imagery, this is where, you know, you want to... I would start here.
Okay.
With this imagery, you know, you got the NAPE and so on and so forth, multispectral Landsat. Yeah.
Okay, I see it right
there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is, you'll be off and running, and you'll be like, oh gosh, there were other things I needed to do today.
Yeah.
That's what's so amazing about this. And again, this is, you know, all those federal agencies that I worked at, I was always dreaming about having a sort of a good library, and there are some good libraries out there. You know, Earth Explorer, USGS. Etc. But the nice thing about this is not just me and a couple of Esri colleagues, it's actually the agencies themselves that contribute content to this Living Atlas. So again, no portal, Living Atlas or otherwise, is the perfect end-all be-all data portal, but I would definitely start here and then branch out. The other thing that I would suggest is for you folks out there is I do have a data blog, since I love talking about data and about sources. So I've got a data blog here, is the top 12 most useful Landsat image sites. I mean, that's something I wrote about a week ago. And so this is not just where to find data and how to know if it's any good, but it's all about societal issues like crowdsourcing and copyright and location privacy and stuff like that I think we really need to be at least aware of and thinking about as we move forward into the 2020s.
Well, this is fantastic. One of the things that I also want to point out is, Joseph also talked about the story maps, and in the final projects that we are putting together for basically the culminating activity for the summer, you have an option of, doing a regular science poster, or do something like a story map. Because this is not like a course where you get a grade, I really encourage you to explore some of these other options, because they are becoming more and more used by the science community as well.
Yep. And here's another example, a story map I made with after going out in the field with some students in geomorphology. So, some web maps there, text, photos, etc. So, yep, awesome.
Excellent. Well, if there are no other questions.
You folks are way too quiet, but hopefully that means that you're like, wow, this is incredible.
I'm completely overwhelmed every time you talk, because you are able to, you have this gift of putting
heaven.
It's just stunning. So I'm sure that even though some of this is reviewed for me, I'm going to be going back and watching this whole webinar again, because there's stuff that you talked about that I wasn't aware of. And I'm really excited about this developer site too. I think that is something that I wasn't aware of. And it's going to be very, very useful, I think, for a lot of folks. Because you said that in the developer site, you do have options to get so many credits a month.
Yep. Yeah, you're basically on the developer site, you're getting a one-person organizational subscription. So you are the only person in that organization. So it's much better to actually use your university or your K-12 school or your nonprofit account, because you'll have multiple people in that organization. But still, it's nice to have this sort of, I think of the developer account as sort of a sandbox where you can kind of test things out and, be able to do stuff on the side and that sort of thing. So, but yes, you folks are the real heroes. Thanks for having me. You're making it happen. You're making a positive impact on our world through all the research and education that you're doing. So I salute you.
Thank you, Dr. Kerski. We really appreciate your help today, and we hope that we'll be able to have you again presenting to our Mission Mosquito folks soon.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
Thank you again, Joseph.
Thanks, folks. Map on.
Map on.